Welcome to another exciting and elucidating episode of the Omni Talk Ask an Expert series. I am your host, Chris Walton.
And I'm Mezzenga.
And we are the founders of Omni Talk, the fast-growing retail blog that is all about the companies, the technologies, and the people that are coming together to shape the future of retail. Or, and as we like to say, the series that focuses on tomorrow's companies and tomorrow's trends today.
Yes.
Joining us to set the record straight for you, our loyal audience, on all things related to customer expectations coming out of the pandemic are Microsoft's Chris Dieringer, Ricardo Belmar, Sue McMahon, and Adobe's Taylor Schreiner. How are you guys doing today? Big collective hello.
We're great.
Hello.
Glad to be here.
All right.
Doing well. Always a pleasure.
We're excited to have you guys. Now, this is not going to be your average.
No, not at all.
I've heard this before. What are the things you're going to tell me about the post-pandemic? I think we're all like over that. So
Yes,
we brought in some experts today so that we can have a real deal conversation. So let's get started first by having you guys each introduce yourselves. Taylor, we'll start with you because you're going to be really setting the table for a lot of this discussion. Let's go ahead and find out about you and your role.
Sure. I'm Taylor Schreiner. I am Senior Director and Head of Adobe Digital Insights. It's the team you may know from seeing our numbers around holiday shopping on TV or on the radio or reading in a newspaper. And we provide that kind of economic and retail insight all year long. And I'm happy to be here to provide some of that here as well.
Yeah, you guys are prolific. I mean,
yes.
I can't, especially during the holiday seasons, like everywhere I turned, it was like Adobe's data this, Adobe's data this, right? Is that's
we basically don't
who
sleep.
we're talking to right now?
Yeah, we don't sleep. Yeah.
I was thinking it would be fun to have like the Adobe tracker going throughout the holidays where you're like the fact checkers of like, is this data accurate? Are we really seeing more people coming back to stores? Whatever that, maybe we'll work on that for next.
Yeah, let's work on that. My analysts definitely feel like they want to do
I'm
some
sure
more
they
work
want more work. Yes. All right, Ricardo, let's go to you next.
Sure. Yeah. Ricardo Belmar. I'm the lead partner marketing advisor here at Microsoft for retail and consumer goods. And that's kind of a long-winded way of saying I get to work with all the great Microsoft partners that are really focused in on delivering great technology and solutions to retailers and consumer goods brands.
Yeah, excited to have you here, Ricardo, especially as we start to dive into some of these topics. I know you have a few companies that you can be throwing our way and throw into the conversation.
Yeah, second time on the show too, I might add.
Yes. Second timer.
Yeah, good to be back.
Let's go to the second timer, Chris Dieringer. Let's tell the audience about you.
Okay, so publicly, Chris Dieringer, lead our U.S. retail and consumer goods practice. Yeah, I mean, I would be clear, private versus public connotation here. But yeah, second timer, long time listener, second time caller, excited to be back here. Right. And yeah, the team that I have and what we do is we look at what Taylor just said around the trends that, come out of Adobe. They're a big, we're a big user of the stuff that you guys provide, not only a partner, but we watch those trends, recognize them, and help our customers realize those wherever they're at along their, digital transformation journey. And I've got a series of practitioners that I pulled out of the market who are steeped in sub-verticals and functions and areas. And one of those is probably the next person that you're going to introduce here is Sue on my team as well.
You took it away for us, Chris. Sue, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. First timer on the show, but again, an avid listener. Nice to meet you all. So Sue McMahon, I'm an industry advisor on Chris's team. As he said, we're all practitioners that have come out of industry, out of retail. I've been in this role almost 5 years now, hard to believe. But before that, I was with Macy's over 25 years, all on the business side. I did some buying early in my career. I ran stores. I ended up moving into the corporate organization to help run stores all up across the US in the back half of my career. So glad to be here today.
Nice. A recovering retailer.
Yes.
I love that.
An
love
operator's
that we have that
perspective.
on the show. Yes.
I like to hear that too, Sue. Glad we have you along for the ride today.
100%. All right. Now, before we get into the discussion, just a quick reminder for those watching the early release of this interview live on LinkedIn with us right now. Feel free to ask your questions of this group at any time. Do not be shy. Just use the chat session window on the bottom right-hand side of your screen and fire away, because these guys are ready to rock and roll and answer your questions as they come in. All right, let's get to it. Taylor, Ann said you're going to set the table for us. I think that was a great analogy.
Sure.
So my question to you to start us off, from the data-driven research that you guys have conducted, what have been the biggest sea changes you have observed coming out of the pandemic from a consumer expectations perspective, and which changes of those are here to stay?
Oh man, there are a number of big ones. It's a different world than we've been in before, and I think we're seeing a lot of stabilization around what I hate this phrase, post-pandemic or late pandemic or endemic phase is going to look like. The clear one that we're facing right now is inflation. Consumers have not expected prices to go up online and should not have expected it for a decade. And suddenly we've gone from prices dropping 5 to 8% every year. Your computer's getting cheaper, your furniture's getting cheaper, your toys are getting cheaper, and all of that is turned around in a way that we hadn't ever seen before. And that comes off of the back of the supply chain challenges that we've seen. So people are expecting to do a lot more looking, a lot more searching, but they're leaning toward e-commerce as the best place to find what they're looking for. And then I think that downstream of that, you see a massive transformation in the way that consumers are fulfilling, right? So they're looking at making purchases and buying them online and picking them up in store, expecting maybe longer delays in some cases and strategizing around that. But the interaction with the physical retail space is totally transformed. And that one, look, supply chain might shift, and we might go back to a more deflationary world. Although I will say people have really moved a lot of their overall shopping online, and so I wouldn't expect overall online prices to keep going down the way they had done before the pandemic. Hopefully we won't be searching for quite so much stuff. But in terms of interacting with stores, one thing we've seen is that as Omicron has come and gone, as Delta came and went, that online offline experience with a store is radically different than it was before, and it doesn't really shift with the waves of the pandemic, and it looks very clearly like that one is here to stay.
And so by that, when you say that one, you mean like buy online, pick up at store,
buy online, pick up in store,
get curbside pickup, that kind of thing.
Exactly.
I want to ask you something about inflation too, because you said something really interesting that actually when people were starting to, I think I might have been on a call with Ricardo actually when this question came up, like when it was early, like what's your position on inflation? And I was saying like, I wasn't thinking there'd be that much because to your point, there's always been so much price deflation online. So from your research, are you seeing that prices are going up online as well as in stores?
Yeah, and it's a combination of things. So I guess you can think of it sort of three ways. One thing is prices that used to go down all the time, computers, electronics, to some degree, toys, things that had chips in them. Yeah, they aren't going up, but they're not dragging the overall set of prices down anymore either. So you don't have that sort of sink for inflation. The other thing that's going on is that what is online shopping has radically changed in the past 2 years. You buy your groceries online, you buy your furniture online. I bought compost online. I mean, these are not things that you used to buy, and those things don't deflate the same way. I mean, if you look at our index of prices for groceries, it basically mirrors move for move offline, CPI inflation. And then in between those 2 points, you do have some things like furniture and personal goods and things like that are affected by the supply chain that are seeing some rising prices. And so when we get out of this, some of those might change, right? Chips might get cheaper. Great. That'll be another sink. Furniture, lumber might get cheaper and flatten out, but groceries are still going to be groceries. And if they're a bigger and bigger portion of the basket, those things are just not going to go down in price. Milk is not affected by online shopping the way that computers are.
Yeah, the mix of online shopping has changed.
Yeah. Taylor, I'm curious, you talked about, how inflation's one thing. That's something that people are shopping online differently. They're looking at pricing differently. And then you mentioned buy online, pick up in store too. Yep. Have you guys seen any all right, and we saw during the pandemic, it was more important to find out somewhere that you could get the item faster. It wasn't as much about price, but how are you seeing that back and forth, and what's the consumer response been?
Well, the one thing that is clear is that from a retailer strategy perspective, you can't really separate your prices in store and online anymore. Not if you're going to have any kind of credibility with your customers. So that that I think also has affected the depth of discounts that we saw from retailers. So in addition to overall inflation, you could see that retailers didn't feel like they had the flexibility, especially, around Thanksgiving and Christmas, when the deepest cuts normally come into prices. They didn't really feel like they had the flexibility to go down as deep as they had before. So average discounts last holiday season were 9% across the board. Previous years, that'd be more like 14%. So, you're seeing that you could also no longer use the e-commerce space as a way to really have a differentiated pricing strategy. And that plays out in a lot of ways for the retailers. And I think consumers have come to understand that and expect that when they buy from a retailer, they're buying across channels with a similar experience and similar pricing.
Okay, so that makes sense. So basically, to recap what you just said, seen a lot of changes in terms of what the consumers expect in terms of inflation, in terms of the supply chain shortage that we've seen across the industry. But to your point, generally speaking, you think while that's happened, some of that's going to go away. The real big change, which probably isn't that big of a surprise to anyone, is really the big change being how people are shopping and how the store is interacting with that digital e-commerce environment now is being the primary thing that is expected to stick around while we deal with the other things related to inflation and supply chain issues. What are the implications then in your mind? That was a great table set, by the way, too. What are your implications in your mind in terms of how the retail industry should start to react to that, or think about that differently than they have in the past? Because you've started to bring up some interesting points around, pricing consistency across both channels. What else comes to mind for you in answering that question?
Well, one thing that we saw is that, or have seen in recent months, is that retailers who have a wide variety of items in stock are able to manage around out of stocks much more easily, which is intuitive, right? But if you're going and looking for shoes, if you have a great personalization scheme, you have some good AI behind it, and you say, look, I see you're looking for this running shoe in size 11. We have it in other sizes, but not that one. But here's a comparable shoe. I mean, that kind of personal experience is really going to allow consumers to navigate around some of these supply chain challenges. And they'll be different by, sub-vertical retail will be different from computers, will be different from groceries. But, it opens a lot of opportunities, frankly, to delight your customers in a world where they expect scarcity and where they expect rising prices. If you can help them find what they're looking for at a reasonable price using, advanced personalization, that's a big win, I think, for a lot of retailers.
And the subcontext of what you just said that I picked up too is you said that SKU breadth actually probably matters within the scope of that conversation, right? Like if you're probably wanting to have more breadth than say depth, and maybe not, but how do you think about that? That dichotomy is always in play in the minds of retailers. Like, did I pick up that in the right way as you just said that, or is that absolutely, or am I extrapolating too far? Okay.
No, absolutely. I would say that the easier strategy to think through is the larger retailer, right? You can create some SKU depth and breadth. I think if you are more of a niche retailer, you got to think pretty hard about who your customers are. You have an opportunity there for maybe a better experience, certainly a lot of loyalty, a lot of helping them navigate items that they specifically want, especially, a lot of SKU breadth will help you find someone who's looking for a running shoe. But so I had a great experience with a sunglasses retailer who said, look, we don't make that set of sunglasses anymore, but what we're going to do is we're going to look and we're going to find some partners who actually have some of this on the secondary market. We're going to connect you. We trust these guys. You're going to make this connection. And suddenly I have a loyal relationship there with a company that has very little SKU breadth, but a lot of investment in the relationship. And I think that's going to have to be your strategy if you're a smaller retailer.
Got it. Okay, so let's bring the Microsoft folks in here too, because that was a great table set from you, Taylor. Thanks for that. Chris Dieringer, let's start with you. What comes to mind for you when you start thinking about what he just said? Like, what are the implications to you in terms of the work you're doing with retailers, and how do you think they should be thinking about this?
Yeah, there's a lot of things in there. And how do we have 2 hours to pick apart each of those, Taylor? Because there's a lot, but I try to condense on the big ones. And Sue, jump in here too. I think so. Anyone, and as you mentioned, that interaction with folks and the rise of mobile commerce, we've seen 70% of that increase, right? If you've installed or seen updates on particularly iOS, have you seen and noticed how you can opt out for any tracking on apps nowadays? It's also coming across many mobile providers. So that rise of first-party data is incredibly important, meaning how much do you know about your consumer given you're losing some of that you might have had before? I know Sue's going to talk about that in a second, but the other one is support support, right? If you think about post-purchase, or you think about, one of the things you talk about is that customer engagement. What's often, may or may not be known as people are clicking that track me where I'm at today is when you have a problem, right? So people love anonymity and being anonymous when you walk into a store, except for that one time that you have an issue. And at that moment, if you guys are like me, I expect you to know everything about me, right? I had this problem 20 times. I talked to 30 different people. How do you not know this? And that's really where, when we talk about that support, is incredibly important. And from the Microsoft side, there's an acquisition that we're almost at the end with a company called Nuance that plugs in also with our Dynamics 365 platform. And we're able to automate that first customer experience through a virtual agent, look deeper at security options. I'll talk about our gatekeeper example that we have for retail and Nuance. And implementations now are going very quickly. Instead of 3 to 4 months, we're seeing them as 3 to 4 weeks. And some of the benefits out of these, we're seeing a 25% reduction in costs. And that's not necessarily in people as much as we have this term called customer containment, right? And that containment means, are people able to self-serve some of those problems directly? We're working with an agent, completely hands-off, with a virtual agent, that we've seen go up roughly about 80%. Reduction in inaccurate transfers. So I'm shifting you to the wrong person. That's gone down about 8-fold. And then security is the really interesting piece. We've seen 68% of shoppers abandon a purchase because, if you guys ever forgot that password or send me that one password I never used before, right?
Yeah, right.
And on the flip side, you have fraud attacks rising around 43 to 48%. So Gatekeeper, it's a really great and interesting way for you to use your voice as a fingerprint. So your voice is now that connection back to all of your interactions that you have with your with the brand. So finally, and the last part that we wrap around that is agent satisfaction has rose 24%. And that's, interestingly enough, because they're not solving that same first time problem anymore. They're able to work on the bigger, more complex problems from that perspective. But really an interesting 3-prong win where we've seen it for the agents, we've seen it for the brand, and we're seeing it for our customers.
Well, and I think that you bring up a good point, Chris. It's taking the experience that you have when you are in a store and you can walk up to somebody and be like, I have this problem. I need a return. This thing is wrong. And we have not had that. I mean, some D2C brands don't even have chat. Like you don't have any help. You got to email them and hope that somebody gets back to you. So I think that's really important what you're talking about, not only making the process more convenient, but also kind of emulating what you would be able to experience, getting people comfortable as they're shopping more online too.
Yeah, it's a great point. And just bringing that physical experience into the digital where, I'm talking to someone either through chat or voice, and then deciding, do I want to follow up with this order? And the cross-sell upsell becomes very important too, because now rather than just a support conversation and solving a problem, you can give recommendations. So it's a great point. We're trying to take as much of that physical experience it might have had and bring it into the digital.
Yeah. So Sue, from your operator's perspective, how would you recap what Chris
right?
just said, right? Like, yeah, it sounds so simple to do, but like, yeah, right. Yeah. 3 to 4 weeks, you got it done. But like, what would you put on top of that?
Yeah, a lot of what Chris talked about has been aspirational for many years for retail and Taylor as well. But we're finally at a point in time where, with the right machine learning and AI tools, a lot of this stuff is real, and retailers can stand it up and make it real. And just to go back to the whole concept of first-party data tracking that Apple kind of put the kibosh on last April. Now Google has recently followed suit. They've been doing this in their search platform in Chrome for a long time, but they're just now announcing that they're going to extend it to Android as well. So marketers have been talking about the death of the cookie that's coming. It's kind of here now. So they're looking for lots of different ways to use first-party data. And the benefit of being a retailer is you really don't have a shortage of first-party data.
Right.
It's just siloed all over the place. You're not looking at it holistically. You're not kind of matching and merging all those various customer transactions to get to a true profile of who that customer is. And as a result, you have experiences like Chris described when, I've spoken to 30 people and my problem still isn't resolved, and you should know that. But at any rate, so lots of talk around first-party data and data platforms right now in retail. How can we bring sense to all of this and really use the data to our advantage now that the cookie's gone and we can't use tracking through Facebook and Google and others to market to customers. So that's a very big topic right now.
Got it. So that makes sense. That's a great point and great takeaway right in the beginning of this conversation too. Like, you got to think about the first party data. You as a retailer have a tremendous amount relative to most other types of businesses. But specifically, you got to think about, given what Taylor said, thinking about using that to augment creating the physical manifestation of what you expect from a customer service perspective in the online world to make your customer service interactions happen that much more fluidly. You should be using it, tapping into that to give your customers what they want at that moment when they do want you to know who they are. That was the part I took away from the big part I took away from what Chris said. Right. Ricardo, what about you? What else would you add on these angles that Taylor mentioned?
Yeah, I think there's a couple things I would add to that. So there's obviously this need that we've all brought it up now, that you need that kind of centralized customer data platform that ties all the different data points together, all the different sources together on everything that you know about that customer, not just to build the right profile, but to then surface for the different organizational parts around the retail. How do I use that data, right? Am I leveraging that data when I'm coming up with a personalized promotion, for a customer? That's one area. Or for example, just how am I leveraging this information when my store associate interacts with a customer in a physical space, right? Not just on digital channels, but in the store. So we're seeing a lot of customers, and I've got a number of partners working on this as well, really finding ways to bring these collaboration tools into the store so that associates, when, to Chris's point, right, when the customer wants to be identified, right, when you want the retailer to know your history, that person at the store has to have access to that information. It's one thing to, where we see legacy folks, right, have this information spread everywhere. The first step is getting it all together in one unified platform. But then the next step is making it accessible, right, to not just people in the call center, but down to the store. Anywhere there's a retailer's employee that's going to interact with that customer, they've got to have access to that information.
Or even to the customer themselves when they're trying to self-service themselves through all these new digital tools, right, as well. All right, Taylor, well, back to you. What else do people need to consider? What else do retailers need to have on their mind, given the types of things you talked about from the changing landscape of perceptions here?
Well, we're seeing a number of other pieces of the trends that are coming up. One is that mobile, which has been taking on increasing portion of people shopping, which frankly we had expected to sort of stay on rails to be about half of all purchases. In dollar terms, maybe next year or the year after, it started to wane just a little bit.
Really?
Now, I got to put that in context. Decelerate is probably the better term, because it's still growing. It's still growing faster than desktop.
Okay.
But it was, and frankly, in 2020, we had one day where half of all sales were on mobile devices or more. Last year we had 6. So it's not like mobile's, dropping off the face of the earth, but it's not, it's moving more toward a kind of equilibrium in the United States that is probably closer to like 60-40 mobile desktop versus, what you might see in China or Japan, or frankly, anywhere else in the world where I think that ratio is going to be higher. So I think that's one thing to look at. Why are we not having more of a mobile experience? And also, what does mobile really mean is something that I think folks need to think about in the retail world, because a lot of us, have a laptop and a mobile device and think of it in that context. But there's a lot of mobile first and only in the U.S. and certainly around the world. So I think that's something to look at. We've seen a major change in financing, really interestingly through us. So the buy now, pay later movement is really, sort of came out of nowhere and is now 5-6 times as big as it was just 2 years ago. And it's going through its sort of early adolescence of figuring out what it is and consumers getting used to it. It is a generationally different way of making purchases. If by any chance anyone on this video hasn't heard of it before, this is the kind of thing where you go to your checkout, right, and you've got that little button at the end, right, and you've got 4 different, you can pay in 4 payments. A lot of vendors offering that. That's a radical shift, I think, from what we've seen in the past. And finally, I think we ought to look at, what is e-commerce going to be, going into the future, is something that we've got to pay a lot of attention to. We track also services as well as purchases, and we're starting to see, travel pickup. We're starting to see, other kinds of ways that people are using their wallet going forward. We're going to hit a different trend here going into next year. So we're going to come out with an e-commerce that is, more comprehensive in terms of what people are buying. There's more of everything they buy is going to be bought online. That's going to continue to accelerate, but their overall purchases are also going to transform, and they're going to be more out and more about and doing more traveling and acquiring more services. I think that's going to transform the wallet and transform the expectations going into next year.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So basically you're saying, like, one, how people are paying is changing by way of the buy now, pay later explosion that we're seeing. What they're going to be wanting to spend their money on is changing. And then also how they're shopping is still, whether mobile, desktop, some combination of the two, is still, very much still kind of, trying to find its way or figure out where it's going to land, so to speak, especially in the US.
Right.
So I'm curious, let's go back. Sue, how do you think about what we just said there? Like, what does that call to mind for you in terms of how people are shopping, what their expectations are around price, what retailers need to do or think about it in that arena? How do you unravel everything Taylor just said?
Yeah, it's something that Taylor said that resonated with me, is this whole shift that's starting to happen as we come through the other side of Omicron into whatever's next. But people really are craving experiences now, and they haven't had them for 2 years almost. So there'll be some level of shift back from buying products to buying experiences and travel and all those types of things. And pre-pandemic, that was the fact that consumers were so focused on experiences was causing pain in the retail markets because they weren't buying as many things in favor of experiences. So that's definitely going to shift back. Also, the whole topic around price inflation, less Christmas was a gift in US retail.
Right.
We picked up, high single digit to low double digit sales revenue gains on significantly less inventory at significantly higher prices. So there's not a better recipe for profitability than that. That's going to swing back. And plus, we're facing the headwind of a lot of the stimulus that was in the economy last year is no longer there. So there's some pretty stiff headwinds ahead, particularly for retailers selling products that are aspirational, not necessarily necessary.
Yeah. So God, that calls to mind too, like the price elasticity and of demand on all these items as the money switches from goods to more services here is going to get pretty intense for retailers. Like Chris, how do you guys advise retailers to start thinking about that, or what types of things can they do to get in front of that?
Yeah, it's a good point. And Sue hit on it, right? And we kind of talk about, actually, Sue and I were talking, and I love the way she quoted it, was we were kind of in this nirvana for retailers, right? Like they had that, as you mentioned, low cost that they were purchasing products for, a higher price point that they could put them in. And it really was a gift, but these headwinds are definitely coming. And, it's, if I can tie Taylor and Sue talked about around that pricing, it's really a question. And as we think it's going to happen moving forward with that loss of stimulus checks coming through, is really, how are you maximizing the margins across, as you mentioned, every sales channel, right? Because operating costs, right, are very different across each of those channels, right? And customers, as they're being pinched, are going to get really savvy with inflation going up and these prices of where they're going to focus their dollars or vote with their dollars. So managing that margin perspective is incredibly important. And when we talk about it, it's definitely a portfolio approach that we want to do and look at across that area. And again, we have another partner within our Dynamics Biz Applications, a company by the name of Flint Fox. And what they look at is it gives you left to right visibility to make your promotional margin trade-offs across the omni channel. And that allows you, right, to know and where you're going to take that hit in your margins, or take a look at those targets from week to week. And the best we've seen in some of these implementations where we've done correctly, there's roughly per product now about $1 million in lost productivity that you can claw back for manual or inaccurate pricing. And as high as, and this is the crazy thing, 74% increase in pricing and rebate offers that were left on the table, really impacting margin and profitability. So that view across channel and being to look at rebates and pricing and amounts and locations are incredibly impactful for retailers and consumer goods companies and wholesalers and distributors to know, like, where am I going to price that product, knowing all these headwinds are coming in the future.
Right. And Chris, how are you thinking about this, or how are you approaching the types of retailers that are, because I imagine, you're talking about services, like it's not just the big retailers anymore. Like throughout the pandemic, more people are figuring out how to get there. You're paying for your shoe repair online when you never were before. But I mean, how are you guys thinking about the types of retailers that should be thinking about this? Because it's not just big box legacy retailers anymore.
That's a great question. And absolutely, right? We've definitely, through Microsoft, it's really important to be where our customers are and looking at those verticals, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you think about in some of the large ones, yeah, you can say grocery, drug, and mass have their own kind of sector and focus that they have that we've talked about. Specialty retail, as you mentioned, has a whole other section from small to big that they've looked at and driven. Food service, specifically consumer goods food service, another large area, right? One of our the largest that you've seen out there, perfecting from manufacturing lines to driving and putting some of those first time they're going DTC, as you mentioned, how do they interact and build that first ecosystem where they largely use the retailer to manage that a relationship with their consumer. And now going directly to consumer, I need to know the price. I need to know who you are. I need to know where your product is. And let alone a fleet that I had that was designed to going to a department store now has to figure out how to go directly to a consumer. So we've definitely broken out and verticalized and looked at each different business and are trying to tailor the best approach based on where they sit today.
That makes sense. Yeah. Especially with all the changes to like, even how people are paying for these things. Like you can get a subscription taco program right now at Taco Bell. Like you can be paying for that with buy now, pay later if you want to.
You just went from shoe repair to taco.
I did.
In one segment here.
Exactly.
You're such a heel.
The vastness of all of the applications for these services and the customer expectation. I mean, think that's another thing to bring it back to. Like the post-pandemic customer expectation is that you're going to get a level of service that you've had for the last 2 years online, and it doesn't matter where you are. Shoe repair or Taco Bell,
100% or both. Like that's Taco Bell are getting our shoes repaired. But I think it speaks to the point too. Like we'll come back full circle to what we said in the beginning. Like you want to be known at the moment when you're interacting with the retailer, right? Mm-hmm. And so Ricardo, that brings us back to something when we had you guys on at the end of last year, which you guys talked about, which was the retail advertising network, how the retail media network was going to be one of the top trends of 2022. And I think you guys have been proven right on that one, quite frankly. I mean, it seems like everyone and their brothers going after this, but that comes back into this discussion too, in terms of speaking to the customer in the moment, serving up relevant information, serving up relevant prices to them that are at the right level of elasticity, given that consumer's relative individual demand. Talk more about that for everyone. Where is that now relative to, how do you guys think about that now relative to when we had you on the show 3 months ago?
Yeah, you know, it's true, right? So that's a trend that's not slowing down in any way. More and more retailers are getting on board with the idea of turning their e-commerce into this kind of a retail media network. And I'd go even a step further where some the larger ones for sure are not limiting this just to their digital footprint, right? So you're starting to see media bundles where a retailer will say to a brand, I can help promote you on product search on the website, but I can also position your product in my physical store, whether it's a digital screen or something else. And then even beyond that, in other display ad networks where they're just really giving them a full managed approach to how they promote and reach that consumer. And then of course, for the brand, right, this means learning more about what those consumer preferences are. Now that in turn is going to help them learn not just how that consumer buys at that retailer versus other retailers, but if they do have a direct to consumer component, right, it's yet another data source that they're going to be able to compare with. So I think all of this ties back into, you know, where we started, right, the conversation today around customer data, how I pull it all together to better understand that customer's journey, and then how I use that to do intelligent promotions, to, you know, help my conversion, to build customer loyalty. You know, we could probably do another hour just talking about customer loyalty in this context, right? And what all the implications are there. There are so many new things that you can do now once you understand your customer with that data set to build on that loyalty. You know, I have a couple of partners who've done some studies as well in terms of, you know, how are retail customers looking at, you know, optimizing conversion versus average order value versus lifetime customer value. I think up until the pandemic, right, we all kind of were zeroing in on where the important factors were, and everybody was starting to talk more and more about lifetime customer value over and above, I think, conversion optimization. Now I'm starting to see trends around average order value. And I don't know, Taylor, if that goes with what you're seeing as well, but I've been hearing that from some of my partners that average order value is starting to become more and more important for some retail customers as a way of whether it's, you know, overcoming price elasticity or overcoming inventory issues, but just building more value per transaction as sort of almost a precursor to how I look at that lifetime value for my customer. But for me, doing all of this really implies that you've got to tie it all back together into one unified system to build that customer profile.
So, and Ricardo, that is what we've been seeing. We've been seeing a increase in average order value. I think also through the shortages from the consumer's perspective, they're looking to bundle up a bunch of purchases. They've been doing a lot of searching. They've been putting a lot of effort into some of these purchases, and they're taking that on and trying to bundle that into individual purchases, especially as, frankly, fulfillment costs have gone up and shipping costs have gone up. And I know retailers are trying to navigate that carefully between, how much of that to pull into their margin and how much of that to, expose directly to the consumer is a tricky balance. And it seems increasingly leaning toward, not putting that burden on the consumer. But Ricardo, you said something that I thought was really interesting. We are seeing as well, and this won't surprise anybody on this call, increasing value coming through email channels, anything that's got first party capability. As Sue was saying, as the cookie wanes, that's one part of it. And the other part of the scale is, I think, is consumers are looking for the kind of deep interactions that Chris was talking about. And just to tie off one last thing, also, I heard Chris say, we were talking about margin management through the, across time. One trend I didn't mention is that, holiday pricing and holiday growth across the year are just not nearly as strong as they've been, in previous years. What I mean by that is, if you get into, Thanksgiving is one thing, right? It's sui generis. But if you look at 4th of July, if you look at Labor Day, you look at Memorial Day, you look at Mother's Day, you see across time, we've seen discounts get less deep, but also consumers, get less elastic in terms of, how much more they're going to buy on those days. So, that is, I think, going to change the landscape for retailers who are thinking about, optimizing their margin and optimizing their inventory across what's going to be a really different calendar year going forward than it's been in the past.
That's interesting. Yeah, wow, that's a whole nother, God, I could come back to you on that one. That's a whole nother topic, the changing dynamics of the holidays and what they mean for retailers, especially given the growth in e-commerce and everything we've seen, and related to Amazon Prime and everything having an impact on that. All right, well, in this time, because I want to definitely have to ask this question. And Taylor, let's go to you first on this one, actually. Sure. Because with Microsoft on, I have to ask about the metaverse, Ann. We have to ask about the metaverse. So I'm curious, Taylor, for you in the early stages of this, what are you seeing from your research around how consumers will or will not engage with the metaverse? What's your take on that, real quick?
Well, I think you basically have to decouple the conversation from the buzzword, because so much is that word metaverse is laden with so many things.
Yeah.
But being at Adobe, we get a lot of insight not only into the transactions, which I'm mostly talking about, but also the creation of 3D objects, the downloading and engaging in 3D objects, and we see that accelerating incredibly quickly. So if you kind of put the metaverse concept to one side and say, what are the AR, VR kind of experiences that are helping consumers, that we see we don't have a numerical tracker, but from an anecdotal perspective, putting your objects in your space for furniture, or getting to see and experience things that you're going to purchase and have shipped to you is accelerating incredibly quickly. And we see retailers creating more and more of those objects, integrating them more and more into their experience. Whether that meets your definition of metaverse or connects with the other pieces, I think is open to everybody's interpretation. But certainly, a virtual and augmented experience of retail shopping is clearly the way that consumers are going to shop. Because if you're going to do most of your transacting over e-commerce, the dress has got to fit, the shoes got to look right. The couch has got to go between the two end tables and not crush things. All of those elements have to work, and the only way that that's going to work is through these kinds of capabilities.
Yeah, so it's augmenting it essentially. Yeah, and we would 100% agree with you too. Chris, since we had you on 3 months ago, what are you seeing in terms of retailers adopting this, or where are you seeing the most traction here in 2022?
Sure. Yeah. And thanks. So as part of like a chapter 2, and I'm great, we kind of addressed the metaverse. Microsoft, we think about it as there's the consumer side, which we talked a lot about, but there's also the industrial and enterprise side of that, right?
Right.
And we talked about last time those 8 criteria, applications, things like we're using this today, mixed reality, logic. You guys, we did some low code, no code conversation, right?
That's right.
We did.
Around what that was. Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the ones that I like to stick on that's getting the most traction at the enterprise level, that's broad and scale. And you mentioned this, Taylor, is that modeling, right? And what we talk about there is a digital twin. So I'm not sure if most folks have talked about, or we kind of went through what the digital twin is before, but the basic way to talk about it is it's the intersection between data of a physical and virtual thing, right? And that's in either direction. You might have seen some things out there like smart cities, particularly for us, one of the number one places we're seeing penetration for that is like at the factory floor in the manufacturing plant, right? And that's where you have thousands of sensors out there connecting onto a device, pushing that back to a platform. And Ricardo talked about this, a digital model, right? Where we've got data that's mined to gather insights, patterns, and then you've got that advanced analytics and machine learning to sit there and find the predictive outcomes based on all that historical data and tools that we have as Azure IoT and Synapse. The one example I guess I like to use here is, have you guys ever, have you heard about PepsiCo Frito-Lay and the perfect Cheeto? Have you ever had a perfect Cheeto before?
No, but I feel like I've
no, but it sounds like a quest I've been on my whole life.
Yes.
Not yet fulfilled.
A warm bag with the perfect Cheeto is a very unique and different experience for everyone. And if you look at it, right, the twins, as I talked about, it's monitoring things like size, shape, flavor, air. There's so many more things out of like 100 extruders that they put this in today. It manages and monitors different things like goals for ethical and environmental sourcing, the packaging, the putting together, chemical, biological parameters, all that different stuff, right? So basically you have all those things that they have producing what they believe is the best one, but you had experts, engineers, people that were like looking at that product. They basically took the brains of those people, put it on our Bonsai app of that brain to look, vibration, behaviors, all that stuff into the AI, track and manage the performance on all of those extruders. And it's really what we start to call, when you talk about the metaverse, AI generated, human curated, to really bring both of those things together at an industrial enterprise level.
Wow. So AI is impacting our Cheetos.
All to make the perfect Cheeto.
Yeah, that's so fascinating. Oh my God. I never thought we'd talk about that. All right. Oh my God. Okay. So unfortunately we're running long on time. So let's get you guys out of here on this, I think to close it up, I had a ton of ahas from this conversation, like a ton. Cheetos being one of them, AI's impact on the Cheeto being one of them. But, what is something, let's go around the horn here to each of you guys. Sue, let's start with you actually. What's one aha or one thing that maybe we haven't talked about yet that you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, I would just say, just to go back to what Chris just talked about in terms of the metaverse, I think we have to be more grounded in reality there. I think there's a huge future ahead for augmented reality experiences and deeper digital, sensory experiences. But I think there's so many things we could be doing right now, like creating the perfect Cheeto. The Internet of Things and connectivity has become such a long way. And even businesses are out there connecting their entire supply chain from end to end so that they can not just do demand forecasting, but actually kind of sensing in real time where the demand is and how they can pivot the supply. So there's a lot of really cool practical application to it for right now. And I'd love to see us focus on that more.
Yeah, I actually just wrote an article about that for Forbes this week. It's going to come out tomorrow, I think, about computer vision being a platform to help, and computer vision AI being a platform to help do a lot of what you're talking about. Ricardo, how about you? Aha, or something you wish we talked about on this conversation that maybe we didn't bring up?
Well, I mean, I think the one thing I'd probably bring up just to kind of tack on one more point here on the whole metaverse conversation. It's that we didn't get to, right? A lot of people like to associate that with things like NFTs and Web3 and how that's going to play in for retailers. I think for me, what I would offer out to everyone is there's no hard and fast answer yet on those. I think what's really important for retailers to consider there is experimentation, right? Which I think is one of the top lessons learned during the pandemic for retailers, is the idea that you have to have this culture of experimentation. If you don't try it, you won't find anything out.
Right.
And it's okay if it doesn't work on the first try, you try again and you keep iterating on it. And my best example, right, that I told everybody during the pandemic was how retailers rolled out curbside pickup, right? From nothing to, amazing curbside implementations like how Target does it today, right? And everywhere in between, right? Most retailers didn't get it right day one. They had to iterate on it 5-6 different times to get it to where customers want it. And everything around Metaverse, NFTs, it's going to be the same thing, right? The only way you fail is to just not experiment at all. And you just end up missing out. And that to me is the big aha with that, is that as a retailer, you've got to try something.
And front and back of house too, like Chris was saying, not just with customer facing, using that customer facing, it's also what operationally can you use those tools
exactly
for?
Yeah, experimentation leads to serendipitous discovery if you're doing it the right way, and that's important. Taylor, what about you? Biggest aha or things you wish we had talked about?
Well, I just want to build on what Ricardo's saying. In a conversation like this, where we're talking about big trends, it's really easy to kind of imply that there are simple strategies or monolithic strategies that everyone should be following. If you experiment, you're going to find, different ways to play. Just because we think that, people are buying online, picking up in store, that doesn't mean you should go build yourself a giant retail footprint, for instance. And just because, AR from a consumer's perspective is great for a lot of things, doesn't mean there's not an opportunity for counter programming the metaverse, right? And having a kind of local and tactile experience that's different, that involves, sending swatches. You've got to be open to all of these perspectives. Like I said, with mobile, where it's very easy to think of yourself as the focus group of one and think, well, I've got my screen and my mobile device, and this is how mobile really works. When you stretch out to the various consumer experiences, you're going to find a lot of space to experiment in. And I think what it all comes down to at the end is, in a world of personalization, you're going to have a really dynamic strategy to reach the experiences that all of your consumers really want to have.
Yeah. And you hit on a point there that's a key theme of us at Omni Talk, which is for every trend, there's a counter trend. And that's something you have to keep very much in mind. All right, Chris Dieringer, why don't you close us out here? Biggest aha you've had from this conversation, or something you wish you talked about that you didn't get a chance to?
That's a lot of pressure. Let's say I've been trying to figure out how to work in Anne's Domino $3 tipping issue that she pointed out not too long ago.
Oh, right.
But yeah, Metaverse is definitely a buzzword. And so, and it's used, and I love you guys' perspective of trend, counter trend. I think practical applications of what's out there today for real return, either in experience or cost savings, is really important. And connecting those things back, as we just talked about, experimentation from digital twins I mentioned, to even, our connected kitchen solutions that we have back into the restaurant market. There's different two avatars at the front end experience that you might work with in a consumer. So there's lots of different ways to get started. And I think, as we mentioned, that first step and getting, taking that first step into that area and trying and failing quickly and having that growth mindset to determine, is this something that we're going to continue to use, leverage, and build on, or something that we failed quickly, learned from it, and moved on to the next thing. That's kind of what I leave us with here.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Well, hey, for all those watching on LinkedIn and listening to the interview, thank you so much for sticking with us. Hey, Chris, first to you, if people found this conversation interesting, want to get in touch with you guys at Microsoft, what's the best way for them to do that?
Absolutely. We also own a product that you just mentioned, LinkedIn, as well. It's a great place to connect up with us in. It's Placement 101. Thank you. We're going to have our emails present in here. You're going to find us in LinkedIn present on here. It's simply in the chat. So reach out on either one of those, and we'll happily connect you up with many of the ecosystem area and partners that we have inside of Microsoft today.
Awesome. And Taylor, same question to you. If people want to get their hands on this great research you guys are putting out.
Sure. Business.adobe.com is your best place to look for digital economy. You will see pricing and economic data continuing to flow through there in the coming weeks and months. So it's going to keep turning in that direction. And similarly, LinkedIn is a great place to connect as well.
Awesome. They can reach out to you directly there. That's awesome. We love when you guys do that. It's so cool. All right. Well, hey, on behalf of Taylor, Ricardo, Chris, Sue, and Anne, and myself, the whole crew, as always, be careful out there.